The wind screamed through the gaps in the metal walls like a dying animal. David Cross tightened another bolt on the broken harvester engine and wiped grease from his hands. Outside his workshop, the snowstorm had been raging for 3 hours now. White death, the colonists called these storms on Stillwater. They came without warning and buried everything under layers of ice and frozen air. He glanced at the clock mounted above his workbench. Nearly midnight. The smart thing would be to head inside, seal the doors, and wait out the storm in his living quarters attached to the back of the workshop. David gathered his tools and switched off the overhead lights one by one. The building groaned under the force of the wind. Something scratched at the front door. David paused, probably just debris blown against the metal. The storm had a way of picking up anything not bolted down and hurling it around like a toy. He continued toward the back door. The scratching came again, slower this time, deliberate. He set down his toolbox and approached the front entrance. Through the frosted window, he could see nothing but white chaos. The scratching stopped. David waited, just the wind playing tricks. He turned away. A weak thump hit the door. Something alive was out there. David cursed under his breath and grabbed his heavy coat from the hook. He pulled it on and wrapped a scarf around his face. His fingers found the door handle. Cold metal bit through his glove. He pulled the door open, and immediately the storm tried to rip it from his grip. Snow blasted into his face. He squinted against the assault and looked down. A small shape huddled against the door frame. Scales, wings, blood. David bent down for a closer look. The creature was barely the size of a large cat. Its body was covered in crystalline scales that shimmered even in the dim light spilling from the workshop. 2 wings pressed tight against its sides, one clearly torn and bent at an unnatural angle. The creature lifted its head, and David found himself staring into large eyes that held far too much awareness for an animal. Frost covered the creature's snout. Its chest moved with shallow breaths. The small body trembled violently. David knew what this was. He had seen pictures in the colony database. A Dravik, the species that every spacer feared. The apex predators that could tear through ship hulls and breathe fire hot enough to melt steel. Galaxy's dragons. This one was dying. The creature made a sound, not a growl or roar. A chirp, quiet and desperate, its eyes never left David's face. He should call colony security. That was the rule. Any unknown organism had to be reported immediately, especially a Dravik, especially one that looked young. Where there was a baby, there might be parents. Angry parents with teeth and claws and the ability to reduce the entire colony to ash. The creature chirped again. Its body slumped against the door frame. David made his choice. He scooped the small body into his arms and kicked the door shut behind him. The sudden silence as the storm cut off felt strange. The creature weighed almost nothing. He could feel bones through the scales. Malnutrition. The torn wing dragged as he carried it deeper into the workshop. His living quarters had better heating. David shouldered through the connecting door and laid the creature on his couch. It barely moved. He grabbed every towel he owned and began wrapping the small body. The creature's scales felt like ice. How long had it been out in the storm? The heater hummed in the corner. David dragged it closer and turned the setting to maximum. He knelt beside the couch and examined the injuries. The wing damage was severe. The membrane was torn in 3 places and the bone structure looked cracked. Frost damage covered the creature's feet and the tip of its tail had turned black. Blood seeped from multiple scratches across its body. Some looked fresh. Others had scabbed over days ago. This creature had been suffering for a while. David had some veterinary supplies. The colony was small enough that everyone learned multiple skills. He helped patch up livestock when the actual vet was off-world. He fetched his medical kit and returned to the couch. The creature watched him approach. No fear showed in those eyes now, just exhaustion. He cleaned the wounds as gently as possible. The creature flinched but did not try to bite or scratch. It seemed to understand he was helping. David worked methodically, treating each injury, wrapping the damaged wing in a splint made from scrap metal and cloth. When he finished, The creature looked like a small mummy wrapped in bandages and towels. It made that chirping sound again, softer now. David sat back against the wall and studied his unexpected guest. A Dravic infant in his home. The colony security would lose their minds. The authorities would want to know where it came from, how it got here, whether more were coming. And they would take it away. David thought about the desperation in those eyes. The way the creature had scratched at his door, not just his door. It had probably tried others first, begging for help while the storm tried to kill it. Only he had opened the door. The creature's breathing had steadied. Its eyes began to close. The warmth and treatment were working. It would survive the night at least. David pulled a blanket over his legs and settled in to watch over his patient. Tomorrow he would figure out what to do. Tonight he had made a choice. A small, injured thing had asked for help, and he had given it. The wind continued to howl outside. Inside, the heater hummed and a dragon baby slept. Sunlight streamed through the gaps in the window shutters when David opened his eyes. His neck ached from sleeping against the wall. He blinked away the grogginess and looked toward the couch. The towels lay empty. Panic shot through him. He scrambled to his feet and spun around. Where did it go? The workshop had dozens of places a small creature could hide. Sharp tools, dangerous chemicals, heavy equipment that could crush something so fragile. A chirp came from under the workbench. David dropped to his knees and peered into the shadows. Two luminous eyes stared back at him. The creature had wedged itself between boxes of spare parts. Only its snout poked out from the hiding spot. Relief flooded through him. He sat back on his heels and kept his voice calm. "Hey there, you doing okay?" The creature chirped again. It sounded less weak than last night. The small head tilted as it studied him. After a long moment, it crawled forward. The splinted wing dragged awkwardly, but the creature managed to pull itself into the open. In daylight, David could see the true color of its scales. They shifted between blue and silver depending on the angle of the light. Beautiful. The creature was beautiful despite the injuries and obvious neglect. It approached slowly. Each step seemed cautious, testing. When it reached David's knee, it stopped and looked up at him, waiting for something. David extended his hand, palm down. He had read somewhere that predators felt less threatened by this gesture. The creature sniffed his fingers. Its nose felt cold and dry. After a moment, it pressed its head against his palm. The small body vibrated. A purring sound filled the quiet workshop. "You're welcome," David said softly. "Let's get some food in you." He stood and moved to the small kitchen area. The creature followed, staying close to his heels. David opened the cold storage unit and surveyed his options. What did baby dragons eat? He grabbed some raw meat from his dinner supplies and cut it into small pieces. The creature sat at his feet and watched every movement with intense focus. David placed the meat in a shallow bowl and set it on the floor. The creature pounced. It ate with desperate hunger, swallowing chunks without chewing. In less than a minute, the bowl was empty. The creature looked up at him and chirped hopefully. He cut more meat. The creature ate 3 more bowls before finally slowing down. Its belly bulged visibly. David filled another bowl with water, and the creature lapped at it eagerly. When finished, it waddled back to David and sat on his foot. The purring resumed. David looked down at the small dragon perched on his boot. What was he supposed to do now? He needed to understand what he was dealing with. He needed information. But asking questions would raise suspicion. His computer terminal sat on the desk in the corner. David moved carefully to avoid disturbing the creature on his foot. It adjusted its position but stayed with him. He sat down, and the creature immediately climbed into his lap and curled into a ball. David accessed the colony database and began searching. Dravic, origin, biology, behavior. The species came from a world called Scorch, located in the Outer Rim territories. Highly intelligent, extremely territorial, capable of living in environments that would kill most other species. Adults could reach sizes comparable to small spacecraft. They formed tight family units and protected their young with legendary ferocity. David scrolled further. Dravik populations had been decimated over the past century. Poachers hunted them for their scales, which had unique properties valuable in manufacturing. Their eggs sold for fortunes on the black market. Conservation efforts existed, but enforcement remained weak in frontier sectors. The creature in his lap shifted and yawned. Tiny fangs gleamed in its mouth. Another search brought up behavioral information. Dravik infants imprinted on their primary caregiver within the first few weeks of life. The bond formed between infant and guardian was permanent and considered sacred in Dravik culture. An imprinted Dravik would protect its guardian even at the cost of its own life. David stroked the creature's head gently. It leaned into his touch. His computer chimed with an incoming message. The colony's public information channel. David opened it. Security advisory. Be alert for a missing biological specimen. Dangerous. Report any sightings immediately. Reward offered for information leading to recovery. His blood went cold. Someone was looking for the creature sleeping in his lap. Another message popped up, this one from Rachel Kim, his friend and the colony's doctor. Haven't seen you in 2 weeks. You sick? Need anything? David typed a quick response. Minor flu, staying home, thanks for checking. He closed the terminal and looked down at the creature. It had opened one eye and watched him. You were stolen, weren't you? David whispered. Someone took you from your home. The creature made a sad sound, almost like it understood. David had a decision to make. Turn the creature over to security and hope it got returned to its home world, or keep it hidden and risk serious legal trouble. Colony law was strict about undeclared organisms, especially dangerous ones. The creature yawned again and closed its eye. Complete trust. It felt safe with him. David thought about his life before Stillwater, the accident that took his wife and daughter, the grief that drove him to the furthest edge of known space, the years of isolation and careful emptiness. He had built walls around himself, high and thick. Nothing got in, nothing got out. This small creature had scratched at his door, and he had opened it. Maybe that meant something. He lifted the creature gently and carried it back to the couch. It protested with a sleepy chirp, but settled when he placed it on the cushions and covered it with a blanket. David watched it sleep for a long moment. I'll call you Frost, he said quietly, because that's how I found you. The creature's tail twitched. Perhaps it heard him, perhaps it approved. David returned to his terminal and deleted his search history. Then he started planning. If he was going to keep Frost hidden, he needed to be smart about it. No visitors, no questions, no mistakes. Outside, the sun climbed higher in the clear sky. The storm had passed, but David suspected another kind of storm was just beginning. 2 weeks passed in careful routine. David worked in his shop during the day while Frost explored every corner of the building. The young Dravik grew at an alarming rate. Already it had doubled in size. Its injured wing healed slowly but showed improvement. The splint came off after 10 days, and Frost began attempting small glides from the workbench to the floor. David discovered that Frost was remarkably intelligent. The young dragon learned to recognize words within days. Sit, stay, come, hide. That last word became the most important. Whenever someone approached the workshop, David would say hide and Frost would dart into the secret compartment he had built beneath the floor panels. The deception wore on him. He told Rachel he was still recovering. He told his neighbors he had taken on a big project and could not be disturbed. He made excuses for everything. But Frost made it worthwhile. The young dragon followed him everywhere. It watched him work with curious eyes. When David explained what he was doing, Frost tilted its head and chirped as if understanding. At night, Frost curled against David's chest and purred until they both fell asleep. The emptiness that had lived inside David for years began to fill with something warm and alive. On the 15th day, Rachel appeared at his door without warning. Enough, she said firmly. You have been hiding for 2 weeks. I am coming inside whether you like it or not. David blocked the entrance. Rachel, I really cannot do this today. You look fine to me, not sick at all. She pushed past him with the determination of someone who had dealt with stubborn patience for years. What are you hiding, David? Frost chose that moment to emerge from the back room. The young dragon had grown to the size of a medium dog. Its scales gleamed in the afternoon light. It saw Rachel and froze. Rachel's eyes went wide. Her mouth opened but no sound came out. She took a step backward. Please do not scream, David said quickly. He moved between Rachel and Frost. I can explain. That is a Dravik. Rachel's voice came out as a whisper. You have a Dravik in your workshop. Yes. A baby Dravik. Yes. Have you lost your mind? Rachel found her voice and it rose sharply. Do you know what happens if security finds out? They will arrest you. They will take everything you own. They might even deport you from the colony. Frost chirped nervously at the raised voices. The young dragon crept forward and pressed against David's leg, seeking protection from the scary human. Rachel noticed the gesture. Her expression shifted from fear to confusion. It thinks you are its parent. I know. David reached down and stroked Frost's head. The young dragon leaned into his touch. I found it during the storm, injured and freezing. I could not just leave it to die. So you kept it for 2 weeks while security has been searching everywhere. Rachel ran her hands through her hair. David, this is serious, really serious. I know that too. They stared at each other. Rachel's practical mind warred with her compassion. David had known her for 3 years. She was tough but fair. She cared about her patients even when they made stupid decisions. Finally, she sighed, show me its injuries. Relief washed over David. He gestured to Frost. Come here, Frost. Rachel is a friend. Frost approached cautiously. Its eyes never left Rachel's face. She knelt down slowly and extended her hand. Frost sniffed her fingers and then allowed her to touch its head. Frost, Rachel raised an eyebrow at David. That is its name. Of course it is. She began examining the young dragon with professional efficiency, checking the healed wing, looking at the tail that had recovered from frostbite, testing the range of motion in its legs. Frost endured the examination with patience. When she finished, Rachel sat back on her heels. You did good work. The wing will probably never be perfect, but it should heal enough for flight eventually. How much is it eating? About 3 kilos of meat per day, sometimes more. Growth rate doubled in 2 weeks. Rachel shook her head in amazement. Incredible. I have read about Dravik biology, but seeing it in person is different. She looked at David seriously. You cannot keep this secret forever. Someone will find out. I know, but what choice do I have? If I turn Frost over to security, they will give it to whoever is offering that reward. Probably the same people who stole it in the first place. You do not know that. Do not I? David's voice hardened. This colony is at the edge of nowhere. Law enforcement is minimal. Corruption is easier than doing the right thing. Frost will disappear into the black market, and I will never know what happened. Rachel could not argue with that. They both knew the reality of frontier justice. So what is your plan? Hide it. Forever, it is already the size of a dog. In another month, it will be too big to hide. I am working on that. A knock at the front door made them both freeze. David's heart hammered in his chest. He looked at Frost. Hide. The young dragon knew that word. Frost darted across the room and squeezed into the compartment beneath the floor. David replaced the panel and kicked a tool box over it. Rachel stood up and tried to look casual. The knock came again, harder. David opened the door. A man in a security uniform stood outside, not one of the regular colony officers. This uniform looked official, but something felt wrong about it. The badge was slightly crooked. The man's eyes were cold. David Cross, the man asked. Yes. I am Officer Briggs. I have a warrant to search your property. Step aside, please. David did not move. What are you looking for? Stolen property. We have received information that you may be harboring illegal materials. Briggs smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. This will go easier if you cooperate. Behind Briggs stood two other men. They wore civilian clothes but carried themselves like thugs, not security, muscle. David's blood turned to ice. These were not legitimate officers. These were the people looking for Frost. Rachel stepped up beside him. I am Dr. Rachel Kim. This man has been under my medical care for 2 weeks. He has been too sick to steal anything. Briggs ignored her. He pushed past David and entered the workshop. The two thugs followed. They began pulling equipment off shelves and opening cabinets. You cannot do this, David protested. That warrant is fake. Prove it. Briggs walked slowly through the space. His eyes scanned every corner. Nice workshop you have here, lots of places to hide things. One of the thugs approached the toolbox covering Frost's hiding spot. He kicked it aside. His hand reached for the floor panel. David stepped forward, but the other thug grabbed his arm and twisted it painfully behind his back. Rachel shouted in protest. The first thug lifted the panel. His face split into a grin. Found something, boss. Frost burst from the compartment with a shriek of rage. Frost moved faster than David had ever seen. The young dragon launched itself at the thug's face. Claws raked across the man's cheek. He screamed and fell backward. Frost landed in a defensive crouch between David and the intruders. Its body vibrated with a low growl that seemed too deep for something so small. Get back, Briggs shouted. He pulled something from his belt, a shock net, the kind used for capturing dangerous animals. Frost saw the weapon and shrieked again. Small flames licked from its nostrils. The temperature in the workshop spiked. The thug holding David released him and backed away. Fear replaced greed in his eyes. Rachel pulled David toward the wall. Everyone froze in a tense standoff. Briggs kept the shock net ready. That creature is stolen property. Hand it over and we will forget about the harboring charges. Stolen from whom? David demanded. You are not real security. That warrant is fake. You are smugglers looking to sell Frost back to the black market. Smart man, Briggs grinned. But also a stupid man. That creature is worth more money than you will make in 10 lifetimes. You really think you can keep it? Frost growled again. The young dragon understood the threat even if it could not understand the words. Its eyes tracked every movement Briggs made. I am not giving Frost to you, David said firmly. Leave now or I will report you to real security. Briggs laughed. Real security on this backwater colony? They could not find their own feet in the dark. He gestured to his thugs. Take it. The two men moved forward cautiously. Frost prepared to fight. David could see the young dragon's muscles tensing. It would defend him even though it was still just a baby, even though these men could hurt it badly. He could not let that happen. David stepped in front of Frost. You will have to go through me first. That can be arranged. Briggs nodded to the thug with the scratched face. The man pulled out a heavy wrench and advanced. Rachel grabbed a tool from the nearby bench. Touch him and I will crack your skull open. The situation was spiraling out of control. Someone was going to get seriously hurt. David's mind raced for a solution. Fight. Run. Stall for time. Nothing seemed viable. Then the workshop door burst open. Helen Walsh stood in the doorway. The elderly woman lived 3 buildings down. She was small and bent with age, but her eyes blazed with fury. Behind her stood half a dozen colonists, neighbors, people David had helped fix equipment for over the years. What exactly is going on here? Helen demanded. Briggs turned to face the new arrivals. His confident expression faltered. Slightly, official security business. Leave now. Official security does not threaten people with wrenches, Helen shot back. She looked past Briggs to David. You all right, son? David nodded. Frost remained pressed against his legs, but the young dragon's growling had stopped. The shift in numbers had changed the dynamic. Helen marched forward and stared at Frost. Her expression softened. Well now, is that what all the fuss has been about? Mrs. Walsh, you should not be here, David said quietly. Nonsense, I heard shouting and called some folks. She bent down slowly and looked at Frost. The young dragon tilted its head and studied the old woman. After a moment, Frost chirped softly. Helen smiled. Pretty thing, injured when you found it. Yes. And you nursed it back to health like the good man you are. Helen straightened and turned to face Briggs. Now explain to me why you are threatening my neighbor over an act of compassion. Briggs had lost control of the situation. Too many witnesses. He tried to salvage his authority. That creature is dangerous and illegally harbored. We are confiscating it under colonial law. Show me your identification, one of the colonists demanded. He was a large man who worked in mining operations. Real identification, not that fake badge. Briggs' hand moved toward his belt. David tensed. But before anything could happen, a new voice cut through the tension. Everyone freeze, actual security here. Captain Liu entered the workshop with 4 officers. She was a tough woman who ran the legitimate security force with zero tolerance for corruption. Her eyes swept the scene and missed nothing. The cowering thugs, Briggs' fake uniform, Frost pressed against David's legs. Briggs, Liu said coldly, I should have known. We have been looking for you for 3 days. She nodded to her officers. Arrest him and his friends, smuggling charges, false impersonation of security personnel, attempted theft, assault. The real officers moved fast. Briggs and his thugs were cuffed and dragged toward the door. Briggs shot David a venomous look. This is not over. That creature is still illegal. Save it for your trial, Liu said. She waited until they were removed before turning to David. We need to talk about your pet dragon. David's heart sank. Frost was safe from smugglers but now faced official scrutiny. That might end up being just as bad. Rachel stepped forward. Captain, David found this creature injured and dying. He saved its life. That should count for something. I am sure it does, but there are protocols, regulations. Liu looked at Frost with a mixture of concern and curiosity. And we have another problem. The colony received a transmission this morning. A Dravik ship is in orbit. They are demanding their stolen offspring back. The workshop went silent. David felt Frost shudder against his leg. The young dragon made a small, frightened sound. It understood something bad was coming. How long do we have? David asked quietly. They are sending a delegation down in 2 hours. Liu's expression softened slightly. I am sorry, David. I know you probably got attached, but that creature needs to go home to its own kind. David looked down at Frost. The young dragon looked back with complete trust. Frost did not know what home meant anymore. It knew workshop, workbench, food bowl, David. The bond between them was real and deep. Breaking it would hurt them both. But what choice did he have? Frost's real family was coming. A baby needed its mother, its own species, its own culture and language. David was just a human who had opened his door during a storm. He knelt down and gathered Frost into his arms. The young dragon nestled against his chest and purred. Okay, David whispered. We will face this together. Outside, the sun began its descent toward the horizon. In 2 hours, everything would change. The colony's landing platform vibrated as the Dravik shuttle descended. David stood with Frost in the observation area. Captain Liu had cleared the space of everyone except essential personnel. Rachel stood beside him. Helen had insisted on coming too. A handful of security officers lined the walls. Frost pressed tight against David's leg. The young dragon sensed something monumental was about to happen. Its body trembled, but whether from fear or excitement, David could not tell. The shuttle was massive, organic curves and dark metal that seemed to absorb light. It settled onto the platform with barely a sound. The boarding ramp extended and a figure emerged. David's breath caught. The Dravik that walked down the ramp stood 3 times his height. Her scales were deep crimson marked with veins of gold. Wings folded against her back were large enough to create shade for his entire workshop. She moved with lethal grace. Every step radiated power and barely contained rage. Behind her came two more Dravik, smaller but still intimidating, warriors by the look of them. They carried no visible weapons, but their claws looked perfectly capable of tearing through metal. The lead Dravik stopped at the base of the ramp. Her eyes swept the observation area and locked onto Frost. The young dragon made a sound, not a chirp, something deeper, more primal recognition. "That is my child." The Dravik's voice came through a translator device attached to her collar. The words were mechanical, but the emotion behind them was raw. "You humans stole it from me." Captain Liu stepped forward. "We did not steal anything. Your child was brought here by smugglers. We have arrested them. This man found your child injured and dying. He saved its life." The Dravik's eyes shifted to David. The weight of that gaze made him feel like an insect being examined before being crushed. "You are the human who harbored my offspring." David swallowed hard but met her eyes. "Yes, I am David Cross. I found your child during a storm. It was hurt badly. I could not leave it to die." "Yet you did not report it. You kept it hidden." The Dravik took a step forward. Security officers tensed. "Why?" "Because I knew people were looking for it. Bad people, people who would sell it." David forced himself to stay calm. "I wanted to protect it until I could find a way to return it safely." "Protect it?" The Dravik's tone held disbelief. "You are a fragile human. You cannot protect anything." Frost suddenly moved. The young dragon left David's side and walked toward its mother. Each step seemed hesitant. When it reached the halfway point, it stopped and looked back at David. The Dravik mother's expression shifted. Confusion replaced anger. She said something in her own language. The translator did not pick it up. Frost responded with chirps and clicks. The conversation continued, mother and child speaking while the humans watched helplessly. David's heart ached. Frost kept looking back at him. The young dragon's body language was torn, pulled between two worlds. Finally, the Dravik mother fell silent. She stared at her child for a long moment. Then she looked at David with an expression he could not read. "My name is Stormwing. I have searched for my child for 27 days, since the smugglers attacked our nesting grounds and killed 3 of our people to steal 6 eggs." David felt sick. "I am sorry, that is horrible." 5 eggs were recovered immediately. The thieves escaped with 1. "My child." Stormwing's voice grew softer. "I thought I would never see it again. I thought humans had murdered another of our young for profit." "Not all humans are like that," Rachel said quietly. "No, apparently not." Stormwing looked at her child again. "But we have a problem. My offspring should have run to me, should have cried for its mother. Instead, it looks to you human." She focused on David. "What did you do to my child?" "Nothing, I just took care of it." David's voice cracked. "I fed it, healed its injuries, kept it warm, that is all." "That is not all. You formed a parental bond. I can see it in the way my child moves, the way it watches you, the way it positions itself to protect you." Stormwing's tone held accusation. "You made my child think you are its parent." "I did not mean to. I just wanted to help." Stormwing made a sound that might have been a growl or a sigh. She spoke to her child again. Frost responded with increasingly distressed chirps. The young dragon ran to David and pressed against his legs, refusing to leave him. "This is unacceptable," Stormwing said. "My child belongs with our people. It must learn our ways, our language, our culture. It cannot stay with a human." David's chest felt like it was being crushed. He knew this was coming. He had tried to prepare himself. But seeing Frost so upset made it real in a way he had not anticipated. He knelt down and gathered the young dragon into his arms. Frost buried its face against David's neck. The purring had turned into a sound of distress. David held tight and blinked back tears. "I know you have to take it," he whispered to Stormwing. "Frost needs to be with its own kind, I understand that, but please do not hurt it, do not be angry at it. This is not its fault." Stormwing's expression shifted again. The rage had drained away. Something else took its place. She approached slowly. Her massive form towered over David, but he held his ground. She studied him for a long moment. Then she spoke in her own language to her warriors. They looked surprised but did not argue. Stormwing returned her attention to David. You truly care for my child. This is not a scheme or trick. You opened your home to a creature that could have killed you when it grew larger. You risked legal punishment to protect it. From those who would do it harm, she paused. Why? David looked down at Frost. Because it asked for help, because it was cold and hurt, because leaving it to die would have been wrong. I lost my own family years ago. I know what it feels like to be alone. I could not do that to another living thing. Stormwing was quiet for a very long time. The platform was silent except for the wind. Finally, she spoke. Among my people, when a child bonds with a guardian of another species, it creates a sacred connection. We call it heart binding. It has not happened in generations, but our ancient laws are clear. A heart binding cannot be broken without destroying the child's spirit. David's head snapped up, hope flickered. What are you saying? I am saying that my child has chosen you as its second parent, and I must honor that choice, no matter how much it pains me. Stormwing's words hung in the air. David's mind struggled to process them. Second parent, heart-binding, ancient laws, it sounded impossible. I do not understand, he managed to say. My child cannot leave you without suffering permanent harm, but it also cannot stay on this world without learning the ways of our people. Stormwing looked at him directly. You must come with us, to our home world. You will live among the Dravik and help raise my child alongside me. Complete silence followed. Even the security officers looked stunned. Rachel grabbed David's arm. You cannot be serious. David has a life here, a business, friends. And my child has formed a bond that transcends species. Stormwing's tone was firm but not unkind. I do not ask this lightly. I know what I am demanding, but there is no other way. The bond must be honored or my child will suffer. David looked down at Frost. The young dragon had stopped making distressed sounds. It looked up at him with those luminous eyes, waiting, trusting, believing that David would find a way to make everything right. Could he do this? Leave everything behind? Live on an alien world among creatures that could kill him with a single swipe of their claws? Learn a completely new way of life? He thought about his workshop, the quiet years of isolation, the careful routines that kept grief at bay, the walls he had built around himself. Frost had scratched at his door and he had opened it. That single choice had led to this moment. Sometimes one choice changed everything. What would I be doing? David asked slowly. On your world, I mean, what would my role be? Stormwing seemed surprised by the question. She had expected more resistance. You would be Frost's guardian. You would teach my child about humans, about compassion and gentleness and the things that make your species unique. I would teach it about being Dravik. Together, we would raise a child that bridges two worlds. And afterward, when Frost is grown, you would be the first human ambassador to the Dravik people. You would help us understand your species better, help prevent future conflicts. Stormwing's expression softened slightly. You would be honored among us, protected, valued. Rachel squeezed his arm harder. David, think about this. You cannot just leave. Why not? David surprised himself with the words. What do I have here, really? A workshop full of machines, a handful of friends I barely see, years of existing but not really living. He looked at her. You told me once that I needed to find something worth caring about again. Maybe this is it. Taking care of a baby dragon on an alien planet is not what I meant. I know, but it is what I have. David managed a small smile. Besides, someone has to make sure humans do not look completely useless in front of the dragons. Helen Walsh stepped forward. The old woman had been quiet until now. You helped my grandson when he got sick last year, worked through the night to fix the environmental controls in his housing unit, saved his life. She looked at Stormwing. This man has a good heart. He will treat your child right. I believe he will. Stormwing gestured to her warriors. One of them approached carrying a device. This is a translator. It will allow you to understand and speak our language. The learning process takes several weeks, but you will be able to communicate. David took the device. It was warm and seemed to pulse with its own energy. What about supplies, clothes, my tools? Bring what you need. We leave in 1 hour. That should give you time to gather essentials. Stormwing paused. I know this is sudden. I know what I am asking is difficult, but I swear to you on my wings and fire that you will be safe among my people. You have my protection, and that is not given lightly. David nodded. An hour to pack up his entire life. It should feel rushed, panicked. Instead, he felt strangely calm, like a piece had finally fallen into place. He looked at Frost. The young dragon chirped happily and rubbed against his leg. Whatever happened next, at least they would face it together. Rachel helped him pack. She moved through his quarters with efficient sadness. Clothes, tools, medical supplies, personal items, everything fit into 3 large cases, his entire life condensed into luggage. You will come back and visit, right? Rachel asked as she sealed the last case. I do not know, maybe, if Stormwing allows it. David touched her shoulder. Thank you for everything, for being a friend, for not turning Frost over to security. You are an idiot, you know that, right? Yes, I know. They returned to the landing platform. Stormwing waited with Frost. The young dragon saw David and bounded over, happy, excited, ready for adventure. Captain Liu approached. For what it is worth, you are doing something incredible. Most people would have turned that creature over immediately. You chose compassion, that matters. Just trying to do the right thing. Good luck, David Cross. Something tells me you are going to need it. The boarding process was strange. The Dravik shuttle's interior was designed for creatures much larger than humans. David felt tiny. Frost stayed close to him the entire time. Stormwing watched them both with an expression that might have been approval. The shuttle lifted off. David watched through a viewport as Stillwater Colony grew smaller, his home for 3 years vanishing into the distance. He should feel fear, regret, something. Instead, he felt anticipation. 6 months later, David stood in a valley on the Dravik home world. Mountains of black stone rose in the distance. Fire vents dotted the landscape. The air was hot and dry. Frost soared overhead. The young dragon had grown to the size of a horse. Its wing had healed completely. It could fly now, really fly. David had learned the Dravik language, had built relationships with Stormwing's clan, had found purpose in teaching young Dravik about human culture while learning about theirs. The days were challenging, exhausting, sometimes frightening. But they were not empty. Frost landed beside him and nudged his shoulder. The dragon had stopped being a baby. It was becoming something magnificent, but the bond remained, the trust, the love. Stormwing approached from the nesting caves. You have done well, David Cross. My child is strong because of you, our. People are beginning to understand yours because of you. You opened your door to a creature in need, and it changed both our worlds. David smiled and stroked Frost's neck. The dragon purred. Some things never changed. I just got lucky, he said. No, you made a choice. That is different than luck. Stormwing spread her wings. Come, the council wishes to discuss opening formal relations with human colonies. They want your advice. Me, I am just a mechanic. You are the human who opened his heart. That is far more valuable. David followed Stormwing toward the council chambers. Frost walked beside him. Together they entered the massive cave where Dravik elders waited. One choice had led to all of this. One moment of compassion during a storm. David thought about his old life on Stillwater, the isolation, the grief, the careful numbness. He did not miss it at all. Sometimes the best way forward was to open the door when someone asked for help, even if you did not know where it would lead, especially if you did not know where it would lead. David had opened his door. Frost had found a home, and together they had built a bridge between worlds.